Broadcasting live from atop the Rocky Mountains, the crossroads of the West. You are listening to the Liberty RoundTable Radio Talk Show.
President Donald J. Trump calls fentanyl a weapon of mass destruction. The Trump administration initiates the Tech Force. We'll talk about that. We got an incredible guest for the Epoch Times coming up. What's in the $901 billion defense bill? Pete Hegseth speaking out about war. And the White House spanks Benjamin Netanyahu. Just a few of the incredible stories we'll be talking about during the show. Welcome, I'm Sam Bushman. Happy to have you along. Our goal to promote God, family, and country, to protect life, liberty, and property, and to do so on your radio in the traditions of our founding fathers. Rejecting revolution unless it's a Jesus revolution. Then we're in, because we follow the Prince of Peace. The good sheriff's with us, ladies and gentlemen. Sheriff Richard Mack, Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, CSPOA.org. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you, Sam. It's great to be back with you this beautiful Tuesday morning.
By the way, now that it's winter, it is beautiful in Phoenix. Low of 50, high 75, just beautiful weather. The sheriff's right on that one for sure. It's a little cold where I'm at, so he wins the weather wars, if you will. Ryan Morgan, our guest today. He's a reporter for the Epoch Times. He focuses on military and foreign affairs. Ladies and gentlemen, check out his incredible columns. Welcome back, Mr. Morgan.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
$901 billion. It's a compromise defense authorization bill. Let's just start out. What do you think of this? Is it going to pass? Are we stuck? Are we going to whatever? Will Trump sign it? Give me the kind of the breakdown.
I believe that it's going to pass. Just my forecasting. To add some clarification, the compromise that we're talking about is this authorization is $901 billion rather than the $893 billion the House previously pitched for the NDAA.
And the $925 billion the Senate wanted, right?
The Senate, yeah. So I guess that's the middle point where they decided to meet. As far as kind of what's in the bill, you have, your standard programmatic.
Just to be clear, what is this 3,000 pages about?
Yeah, so the National Defense Authorization Act is an annual defense authorization. It's separate from the appropriation. They actually have to pass the appropriation as a separate bill. But the authorization gives the military, Department of Defense, Department of Energy for nuclear related issues, it gives them the authorization to run these programs. So every year you're going to see kind of a standard set of here are the weapons procurement and development programs, and some of them are kind of legacy, some of them are newer projects. So this year we're seeing with Donald Trump's Golden Dome kind of missile defense reboot initiative, and then there's the F-47 fighter jet. Those are kind of the new programs that are coming up. Other advanced aircraft like the B-21 Raider stealth bomber, and then you have like a kind of a smattering of kind of other topics that are a little less related to the arms procurement side. You've got some of the kind of cultural issues that sort of bleed into the military. And then one of the key ones, or I guess there's a couple key ones. One of the key ones was there is a kind of provision where it fences in part of Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth's travel budget until he provides kind of more details. I believe it's unedited footage regarding the recent strikes in the Caribbean and in the East Pacific as we're blowing up these alleged drug boats that have been operating in the area.
All right.
So
before we get to the drug boats and everything else, though, $901 billion, nigh on to $1 trillion. Now, Trump made some statements in the past saying, hey, we could take care of the nation's, security and military defense budget for about $500 billion. But yet now it's $901 billion. I mean, if it was me somewhere along that line, I'd be taking a meat cleaver to that, sir. Am I crazy or?
Well, opinions are kind of outside my purview. I believe it was. I'm trying to remember. It was. I think it was. He was the acting Secretary of Defense right at the end of the first Trump administration. I think it was Chris Miller. Um,
Hmm.
he had talked about, we could probably get away with our kind of national security strategy, or sort of our national security outlook, for about half of what we're spending now. And I believe at the time we were in kind of the 800 billions range. So there's been talk, throughout kind of the Trump political era of reducing that defense budget, but as we can see, there are other political powers at force. The Trump administration preferred that lower number that the House gave, but the Senate wanted to go with a bigger top line for the authorization. So,
So the
whatever
Republican
Trump
led
says,
Senate wants
yeah,
more.
yeah, whatever Trump says. I mean, he still has to work with the House and the Senate Armed Services committees, and
Sure.
they've got kind of a separate agenda. I mean, sometimes it aligns and sometimes it's a little bit different.
Sheriff Mack, what do you say to this? $901 billion dollars. It's a compromised defense authorization bill, NDAA. I would pray Trump would not sign it.
Well, I hope President Trump does take the meat cleaver to a lot of the things going on in Washington, D.C. Spending has always been a problem for both the Democrats and the Republicans. I like the commercial that you have from Rand Paul that talks about the careless and senseless and out of control spending of Washington D.C. That's been the biggest problem every year. Every year, one thing without a doubt, that spending in Washington D.C. will get worse. I wish I could invest in the overspending of Washington D.C. because that stock would rise every year. I could retire on that just the next 4 or 5 years. It is absolutely out of control, and I do believe that President Trump said he was going to do something about that. So I hope he does take the meat cleaver to it, and I hope I think everybody's really on edge because they don't want to be blamed for another shutdown of the government. But they just need to make one simple rule in Washington D.C. If there's a shutdown, Congress does not get paid and they don't get reimbursed. Period. End of story. And then none of this will ever happen. But the spending has got to come the other way. And politicians just don't know how to do that. And what did I say during the shutdown just a few weeks ago? Fire Congress. Fire all of them. I don't care. Fire them until we get people who are serious about bringing uh, spending under control.
Well, when you have a $6 trillion budget and the nation's $38 trillion in debt and rising at an alarming rate, when many of the different accreditation services are basically, hey, saying
Yeah.
we're going to have to decrease your quote credit wherewithal or your standing or your whatever credit worthiness kind of thing. And it seems to me at some point we cannot just be saying we need more money for this. And right now it's the Republican led Senate pushing for more money. I haven't really heard Donald Trump chide them and say, guys, stop it. We don't need more money. We just need to cut the waste and we need to kind of focus on truly defense. It seems to me that it's like offense, a lot of it around the world. Ryan Morgan, is a lot of it kind of offensive as opposed to defensive?
Um, I think right now, I mean, a lot of our legacy kind of programs are still very offensive oriented. The big defensive program that I guess is coming forward is the Golden Dome, which is supposed to be kind of like Trump's version of the Reagan Strategic Defense Initiative, the Star Wars, as a lot of people called it. Um, but I mean, you look at the programs. It's still a lot of offensive capabilities. The next generation stealth fighter jet and the B-21 stealth bomber. Those are offensive capabilities. Yeah, does that?
Yeah, no, I understand. And that's kind of the concern that I have is when is it defensive in nature? When is it offensive in nature? When is it we're kind of nation building around the world? And when are we paying more than our fair share for some of these, quote, international groups that we seem to love to be part of, even though it breaches our sovereignty? But you were able to cover Secretary of War Pete Hegseth's speech. This
Yeah.
week, he basically talked about, Trump's America First initiative, military strategy, if you will. What does that look like? Is it offensive or defensive in nature? What did he say?
Yeah. So,
Hold on,
and that
hold on.
is,
I'm sorry, a break's right here. We'll take a quick break. Come straight back, and Ryan Morgan with the Epoch Times will give us kind of a breakdown. So Pete Hegseth give a big speech about America First. Here's the plan for Trump's military policies around the world. We're going to break it down with Ryan, see what it looks like. Sheriff Mack will chime in and more. You're watching Liberty Roundtable Live. Ryan Morgan, our guest. He's a reporter with the Epoch or Epoch Times, ladies and gentlemen, covering what's going on in the military, foreign affairs, and more. And Pete Hegseth gave a big speech about America First. Can you break that down for us, sir?
yeah, happy to. And I think the question you asked me at the break was, is this more of a defensive kind of national security or military strategy, or is it more offensive? And I think that is kind of the devil is in the details. There is kind of like a pivot right now where um, I think the Trump administration is trying to reconcile, how do we kind of bring the attention back home? How do we kind of offload some of the responsibilities that the U.S. military has taken over the decades, and kind of bring the focus back home? So one of the key points is burden sharing among allies, which is kind of, if you are trying to bring your forces back home and bring your focus back home, you do need to, with whatever alliances you have around the world, kind of get them to shoulder more of the responsibility for their region. And that's particularly a focus in Europe with NATO, especially as they're trying to step back from this war in Ukraine and kind of put an end to it. There's all these calls for, okay, well, how do we give Ukraine security guarantees? The Trump administration is like, yeah, we'll sell you guys the weapons, but we're not going to give them away for free. And for the regional stability, you need these European allies to do more. And then, whether you want to call it like I don't know that people would really necessarily call it a fully non-interventionist sort of approach to military strategy. There is still, what they're calling it is kind of like a rational realism, where there are still, foreign interests and foreign areas of focus where the U.S. will still be around. I think the Indo-Pacific with China is kind of a key point where they're still trying to maintain some kind of presence and kind of keep China in check. But
Yeah,
a
the
big
idea
focus.
the idea
Yeah.
is, hey, how do we leave? How do we trim down? How do we let them shoulder more of the responsibility? But also, how do we not leave a big vacuum? How do we not leave a big hole that could be filled by, even greater ne'er do wells that could cause us serious harm and problems? And I mean, it's a fair point, Sheriff.
Yeah, it is, and it's still, if you look at the Constitution and when it talks about the military and that we're not even supposed to have a standing army, you know, uh, obviously that went the way of the world after World War II, and we have military bases throughout the world. The military is a huge part of our budget, and, and I don't know what the answer is to it. Of course, people say world peace. I feel like part of the Miss America pageant. Yeah, if we could just have world peace, wouldn't that be wonderful? Uh,
And truly, it would.
but yeah, it would absolutely. And I gave a talk in church a couple of days ago just about the Prince of Peace. If there was ever a time that we need the Prince of Peace in our lives and in the world, it's now. But the reality is the threat against America and the threat against freedom and the threat from within and from without in America is so egregious and so acute that I just the reality is that provision in the Constitution really doesn't seem to apply and make sense But at the same time, I wish it was, and I wish that we'd pay more attention to the Constitution. Obviously, that's what our program here is dedicated to. But you know, I really wish that we would focus on the size of our military and say, and I agree with Miller when he was that Ryan was just talking about, at the end of Trump's administration, the Secretary of Defense. We have got to find places to cut, and we've got to find places in our government that are excessive spending. And DOGE was doing that at the beginning. Where did they go? And we really have got to focus on that. And one thing I do want to complain about is Steve Forbes. After Trump said that we could just get rid of the income tax, Steve Forbes and another economic pundit got on there and they said, "Oh well, we only bring in 2 trillion with we bring in a whopping 2 trillion in income tax for the economy, and Trump's only got bringing in about 600 billion with that, so it just wouldn't work." They never talked about the excessive spending. Steve Forbes did not talk about excessive spending. If we would simply look at the constitutional provisions that we are allowed to spend money on in this country, we wouldn't have a $38 trillion debt, and we wouldn't have these spendthrifts and these crooks in Washington, D.C. continuously stealing the money from the American people, and we would not need the income tax.
I
Steve
agree
Forbes.
100%, but that is why I kind of brought up the $901 billion, almost $1 trillion. If you can't
I
save
know.
that much when it comes to, say, the nation's defense, or whatever you want to call it, offense, or whatever, the nation's military, we spend more on the military than all other nations combined. Uh, if you can't get rid of that, you can't get rid of Social Security and some of the third rail programs, and then you can't get rid of the interest on the debt. Hey, there's not a lot of places to cut anymore. So that's kind of the problem with all that. But what else did Mr. Hegseth say, sir?
Yeah, so I guess kind of to get back to sort of the policy shift, as they are, kind of stepping back from Europe, and I guess kind of sort of standing up a similar framework for how do we burden share in the Indo-Pacific. The last real big component in terms of regional focuses is the Western Hemisphere, and we're kind of already seeing that now with these
Is it
ongoing
kind of like the
strikes.
Monroe Doctrine? Is that what we're talking
Yeah.
about?
Well, I've heard it referred to as the Row Doctrine, the Donald Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine.
That's right.
And so we are seeing a focus where one key component is we're going to keep non-hemispheric actors, which is coded word for China or Russia. We're going to keep them out of the region. We're going to block their influence here. They're not going to be setting up military bases in South America, Central America, wherever in our hemisphere. We are going to be kind of the preeminent hemispheric force here, and we're not really going to share that space with people from the outside. And then we are going to kind of focus on border security, use our military for border security and combating um, drug trafficking through the region.
What do you think about these all these boats that have been taken out now? They're up to what 20 boats, 100 people dead approximately, or something like that. Or what do you think of all that? Where are we at on that? And did Hegseth respond to that?
Yeah, at the time that Hegseth gave that speech, he was facing a lot of scrutiny in Congress about whether or not there was I guess, kind of a war crime violation with one of these strikes. And I mean, during his speech, during his remarks, he was pretty unapologetic about those operations. I don't think he's inclined to back down from that. Um, and certainly the administration. I'll just say, from my standpoint, it does feel like these strikes are kind of the build up to something bigger. We've seen Donald Trump talk about, hey, we're looking at land strikes, and at first it seemed like a lot of the focus was on Venezuela. I think in more recent comments, he said, anywhere where we're seeing land operations, it could be hit. And so I guess kind of time will tell exactly how that turns out. But I think it's going to be more than just these boat strikes that we've been seeing.
And are we talking about troops on the ground? Is Donald Trump going to be a war president, or if Congress never declares it, is it going to just be this terrorist, so-called unnamed enemy, no country of origin, kind of a battle back and forth, and no declaration of war, no mark and reprisals, just more of President Trump deciding by himself? Is that what we're seeing?
I think I think that's what we're all waiting to find out. I've talked to, and I don't want to just punt to, sources say, sources tell me, but I have talked to a few people that are at least moving forward with the anticipation that there is going to be on the ground military action of some kind in Venezuela. Exactly the scope of that, where it starts, where it ends, what's the mission window for that is still, something we're waiting to see if it does happen. I want to be cautious to not forecast too far ahead with just the information that I'm hearing.
Yeah, is
But
it
I do
about
hear some
oil
interesting
or
things.
drugs or both?
Um, everybody does mention that Venezuela has a vast untapped oil resource, and perhaps that is an area of focus. I think as Maria Corina Machado has advocated for further U.S. action in her country in Venezuela, she has advertised, hey, we're ready to partner with you guys on our oil. Um, but whether or not that's kind of the deciding factor in whether or not Trump moves ahead remains to be seen. I do think a big part of this is his national security advisors, Marco Rubio. He's the son of a Cuban immigrants who fled communist Cuba, and I think there is kind of a sort of a generational focus on how do we preserve our Latin American countries from um, approaching communism, socialism. I think that's a focus for Marco Rubio.
Amen to that. I got a hard break, Mr. Morgan. Can you stay a couple of minutes longer?
Happy to.
All right, stay there. I want Sheriff Mack to be able to chime in on this, and he's got a couple of questions for you and more. We'll do it all, ladies and gentlemen. Sam Bushman, Sheriff Richard Mack, with our incredible guest, Ryan Morgan. He's a reporter on military and foreign affairs for the Epoch Times, theepochtimes.com. This is Liberty Roundtable Live. Ryan Morgan with us, ladies and gentlemen. He's a reporter for the Epoch Times, focusing on military, foreign affairs issues, etc. The epochtimes.com. Check out his incredible columns, etc. We were talking about Mr. Morgan covering Secretary of War Pete Hegseth's speech, laying out America First strategy for Trump, or Team Trump. Sheriff Mack, what do you say to this? I'm just concerned at how much money we're spending. I'm concerned that, I love the idea that we're going to not rule the world. We're going to kind of focus on our hemisphere. I think that's great efforts. I think the Monroe Doctrine or the Row Doctrine that we're talking about, I think is a good idea. I think we're going the right way. I just think we're not going fast enough in the right way. Sheriff?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if the Row Doctrine is the right way. I, the Monroe Doctrine seemed to be a little bit, when it first came out, seemed a little bit self-aggrandizing, and uh, we can we can invade everybody we want in the Western Hemisphere, but nobody else can. So I don't quite get that. But at the same time, if 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 Congress, if the president is supposed to check with Congress before he does this kind of stuff, then where's Congress pushing? Where's the pushback from Congress?
They're
Where's,
derelict in their duty. People have tried to do things about it, and Mike
yeah,
Johnson's got them all shut down and stymied.
yeah,
Um,
it doesn't make sense.
Ryan, do you want to respond to that? It seems like Congress is kind of holding up a lot of this stuff, really.
Well, I will say that I believe it's been two now, and I think there are plans for another attempt in the House and in the Senate. There have been multiple attempts just in the last couple months with members of Congress, primarily the Democratic Party, trying to assert, kind of a war powers resolution to halt the ongoing strikes and preempt any kind of military action directly against Venezuela. So there have been efforts to, I guess, kind of reassert that constitutional authority to declare and authorize wars. I've also spoken to lawmakers on the Hill about, hey, even without a declaration of war, do you guys want to at least assert some kind of authorization for the use of military force in this
Yeah, they
region?
can
Are
use
you guys
mark
going to
and
do anything
reprisals and
with
all kinds of things short of a
that?
declaration of war, right?
Right. Yeah, I do believe there are members of Congress that are inclined to assert their authority, but they're kind of taking the passive approach where we will assert our authority if the majority wants it, but the majority isn't pursuing it right now.
Yeah, but
Sheriff?
haven't we already declared a war on drugs a long time ago? And then this is kind of like the takeoff on that, or or was that just a uh, publicity stunt? And this is my other question for the Democrats or anyone else opposing. What do we do about the proliferation of drugs in Latin America? What do we not? Do we just let it go? Everybody has let it go. Everybody in history except for President Trump. He's now doing something about it, and then the Democrats come out and oppose it. What do they say? Then what is their solution for the proliferation of drugs in Latin America and the Western Hemisphere? Is anybody going to do anything about it?
Did Mr. Hegseth talk about any of that kind of stuff? Mike?
Uh, at his remarks, the Reagan National Defense, yeah, he did talk about it. And I would say just all throughout the Trump administration, every time they hit one of these boats, they say, this boat represents 25,000 American lives that could have been lost, which kind of gives the impression, okay, these boats are carrying fentanyl, some kind of drug with a really high risk of overdose deaths.
Right.
Of course, when I've talked to Democratic members of Congress, they've said, we don't actually see any indication these boats are carrying fentanyl. I believe it was Senator Mark Warner that told me this week. Right now, it looks like it's mostly cocaine. Um, Colombia, which is on the border of Venezuela, is kind of the cocaine capital, cocaine powerhouse. But most of the fentanyl actually comes through from China,
Mexico, right?
the precursors, and then they come up through Mexico. So there's a lot of questions there of what these boats are carrying. I certainly talk to members on the Democratic side, members of Congress that say, we don't want people to, be killed by these drugs. We do want to stop drug trafficking, but I think they're, they challenge whether or not this is something that needs to be enforced with military firepower or whether this should be a law enforcement issue.
Well, and people also wonder, is this something that, hey, if the president's going to act, he has authority to act, but only if Congress grants and funds that authority. And right now we've got kind of this no man's land where Congress, is stuck on stupid, can't get anything done, can't pass anything, can't whatever. The president's feeling like, hey, Congress is inept and can't work. I got to do something to protect the American people. And that's why I don't criticize Trump for a lot of this. I think he's just stuck and he's like, hey, I either do something and try to make America better, put America first, do something, or else we just get stymied and do nothing. I don't want to be the do nothing guy. You can't blame Trump for that. I think he really wants to do, but hey, Mike Johnson and company have not backed him really. Mike single-handedly can just shut down anything he wants to. And as far as I can tell, they haven't really addressed these issues clearly and directly, right?
If you're turning to me, no comment on the opinions. I will just say,
Well, the question is, has Congress done anything to support Trump in this, really?
yeah, I'm trying to, I'm struggling to think of a very specific thing Congress has done in support of that. I mean, we hear statements primarily from the Republican side saying, you know, Trump is within his right here. We support the effort
But
to
if Congress would
combat.
act, if
drug-
Congress would act and give him authority and appropriate guidance as the Constitution calls for with the checks and balances, we wouldn't even be debating or hesitating about this, right?
Most likely not. Yeah, I think if Congress were to declare war or do some kind of authorization for a lesser use of military force, there would be a lot less debate about it.
And I think that's really, in my mind, where the rubber meets the road. What else do we need to know before we let you fly? I don't want war. I want peace. At the same time, I agree the world's getting to become a more dangerous place, it seems like, all the time. And I think Trump does want peace in his heart. And I think he's tried to negotiate some deals, which I don't envy him. I don't think you'll ever get deals done with people that have been fighting for thousands of years. That's just my opinion. But I really would like to see America first in the sense that, hey, we don't put our troops in harm's way. We do defend the homeland in America. And I'd love to see that. And I think Trump's trying to move there. I just think that the nation's divided and Congress is stuck, and it's really difficult to get there. I don't want to be critical of anybody. What I really want is the Constitution to work. I want the checks and balances to prevent anybody from using power that they ought not. At the same time, I want us to be unified in saying, hey, we don't want drugs or crime or an invasion of any kind, a drug invasion, a human invasion, or anything like that in America. And I want to bring our troops home, except for appropriate defensive measures. Your thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah, I would take this moment to just mention the two U.S. soldiers and the U.S. contractor that were killed over the weekend in Syria. It's raised the question of why are we still in Syria? What's the mission at this point?
And where's the authorization is what I would kind of also say. Why do we have people on the ground in Syria right now and stuff like this? To some degree, I don't understand it. They say it's to create stability in the region and it's to do this and do that and help the freedom fighters. But the freedom fighters of today are the enemies of tomorrow is the sad part. I wonder why those people are there as well, Sheriff.
Yeah, it's amazing that we are. I don't know if Trump or Hegseth has created a compact some sort with Syria, because we're in a lot of different countries around the world, and we have
So Ryan, really quick before the break, why are we there still? Why are we even there?
On paper, we are there to continue fighting ISIS. But again,
now
it's
Donald
a question
Trump said Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama created ISIS, so maybe we just need to round those guys up and toss them in the clink.
No comment.
I'm just saying that's what Trump said, and if it's true, hey, they don't belong on the streets.
It's a little bit more complicated than that, but
Agreed.
the U.S. did have a role in catalyzing the formation of ISIS. Operation Timber Sycamore.
Yeah, very, very strange indeed. Do you think that we're going to end up in a war, or do you think we can peacefully navigate this, Ryan?
A war where specifically?
Anywhere.
Venezuela?
There's so many fronts I can't even answer your question.
I would say Venezuela right now, in my mind, is the area with the highest potential.
And my prayers are for peace. Ryan, final statement?
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. I love talking about this stuff.
Mr. Morgan doing a phenomenal job for the Epoch Times, ladies and gentlemen, covering Secretary of War Pete Hegseth's speech, talking about what's in the $900 billion boondoggle bill, in my humble opinion. Thanks, Ryan. We appreciate it. Ryan Morgan, everybody. All right. A lot of people would blame President Trump for things, and I'm just not interested in blaming him for this. I think he's trying to make the world a better place. I think what he's got is a Congress that's just absolutely paralyzed. They're on vacation all the time. They're paralyzed. Most of the things President Trump is doing, if congressional support was there, it wouldn't be a conflict. It wouldn't be a problem. It'd be fine. The problem is, and I don't understand why President Trump isn't calling out Mike Johnson and other people. We're just stuck. A lot of what President Trump wants to do is right on. If we can just get it properly carried out via the Constitution, we'd be in business, Sheriff.
Yeah, we really would. And, there's quite a dichotomy going on here, because Trump, on one hand, is touting his success in ending wars throughout the world. And I think his press secretary said there was like 7 or 8 now where he's helped create peace. And so, but he's talking now about himself invading Venezuela. And you have to ask, where does that end? Because if he needs to invade Venezuela to stop the proliferation of drugs, then he might as well keep going and do it in Colombia and Mexico. And Mexico is really where, as you alluded to earlier, the fentanyl comes from China and goes into Mexico and then comes up into America.
Yeah, so the drug and human invasion really is Mexico's the ground zero, right?
You would think so. And so I love that someone somewhere in the world, in the United States, is finally doing something about the secret societies that are making sure that America stays drug addicted. We are the most drug addicted nation in the world. We have 4% of the world's population, but we use 60% of the world's illicit drugs. And no one addresses that. No one does anything about it. Oh, yes, we spend $100 billion a year to stop it, and we haven't stopped anything.
And sadly, over those number of years, too, we've found story after story where the CIA or these kind of different government agencies, the DEA and all these kind of, they end up involved in using drugs and giving special privilege to certain cartels at the expense of others under the guise of we're climbing the ladder to the kingpins and all this kind of stuff. And they've really partnered in drug distribution around the world in many cases.
Yeah, and not only that, but the cartels obviously are funded with the drug war. They make billions and billions. It's probably even more. It's a multi-trillion dollar industry worldwide. The international terrorists do human trafficking just like the cartels do. They do drugs and guns and drugs and guns and drugs and guns. And then who helps them fund that? The people who use their drugs in America. So the funding literally comes from within our country because we are so drug addicted in this nation. And we
and
use
locally, especially in some of these places where they have these whatever you want to call it, what do they call it when the illegals can stay there? Amnesty zone or whatever, amnesty state or city or whatever. That's where a lot of this stuff proliferates as well, because you've got literally drug dealing in parks all around the country. The cops are just like, oh, we don't go there. It's just a cesspool. Or, you see this around the country too. We need to take care of issues not only internationally, but domestically, right?
Yeah, we do. And not only that, but then the cartels, and as we've seen with the fraud going on in Minnesota, the international terrorists set up businesses and they're shield businesses, and then they fund politicians and a lot of different things. But the cartels specifically have used their shield companies to donate to politicians in Arizona and around the country.
Yep, we'll get into the details of that next hour because the Minnesota thing is a huge deal. For now, though, I want you to know that the White House reprimanded Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for violating the ceasefire with Hamas. I guess they killed a senior military commander. How do you say this guy's name? Raid Saad or whatever. Anyway, the private rebuke follows the strike that occurred on Saturday, and they want to reach a negotiated deal. That Trump's been working on that, etc. White House envoy Steve Witkoff, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Trump advisor Jared Kushner have expressed frustration over Netanyahu's actions, saying, hey, man, he broke the ceasefire. Well, what Netanyahu says is they broke it first. Now, a senior White House official quoted a White House message warning Netanyahu against damaging Trump's reputation, asserting the importance of honoring your commitments. An Israeli official acknowledged the White House dissatisfaction, but described the message as mild and argued that Hamas already violated the ceasefire. So this is the problem with this thing, Sheriff. They say we had to kill this guy to maintain the ceasefire. The White House obviously has raised additional concerns about this violence in the West Bank, and U.S. officials are emphasizing the need for de-escalation. I agree with that. Now, President Trump is going to meet Netanyahu at the end of the month and everything else. I don't know why we're treating Netanyahu as the rock star. Now, whether Hamas violated the ceasefire or not, that doesn't give, Netanyahu or Israel the right to violate the ceasefire too. It's just, hey, we're going to fight, and they say stop fighting, and we stop, and then somebody throws a wild punch, and then they punch back and say, well, he punched too. Right. No. Ceasefires really require a lot of restraint, Sheriff, to say, I know they did that. You guys got to stop it. We're not going to fire back. We're going to set the standard. We really want this to stop. But Netanyahu playing into the hands of this continuing.
Yeah, so if anybody thought that Hamas wasn't going to violate the ceasefire,
They're crazy.
You're crazy. So Netanyahu had to have had some sort of plan in place for that eventuality. So look, I'm not going to get after him too awfully much, because you knew this was going to happen. And how far do you let Hamas go before you actually say, look, we will keep our agreement, but if you don't, we won't. And that seems to be what he's playing into. And so is Hamas trying to set him up? See, we told you Israel's the problem.
Very
And so
likely, yes.
it's almost a no-win situation for Netanyahu.
It is, but my response is this: I think Trump kind of, or the White House kind of spanked him and said, "Stop this." I think we can cooperate and show really who the culprit is. But every time Israel kind of falls for this and does this now, it's hard to know who to point the blame at. If Benjamin Netanyahu on the national stage said, "Look, they breached their ceasefire 21 times, and so far we've done nothing. This isn't going to hold if we don't get a handle on this," I think we need to manage the media a little bit better in terms of what's really going on. And I don't think that I really know what's going on exactly over there either. That's part of the reason I think we should stay out of it. Nevertheless, though, I would love to see a ceasefire really stick, but I just don't believe it. I'm too jaded, Sheriff.
Yeah, and a lot of people are jaded about this, and so obviously, when they said, well, they're going to have a ceasefire, yeah, right, with Hamas, right, but the only thing Hamas understands is violence, and
is hostilities for
when
sure.
it's going to be used against them, is usually about the only time they ever back off. So it's a tough situation, and like I said, it's a no-win situation for Netanyahu, and so God bless that situation, but this is gonna continue.
Unfortunately, it will, and I pray for peace, is all I can say. President Trump signed an executive order designating fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction. The order comes as the administration increases its attacks on drug traffickers in the Caribbean, as well as Maduro and all this kind of stuff. Trump highlighted that fentanyl is responsible for the deaths of 200 to 300,000 Americans per year. The mainstream press says it's about half that, but whatever. The executive order outlines that fentanyl can potentially be used for large-scale terror attacks, and the whatever it is, source products or source materials made for fentanyl can also be used for this. Everybody's voicing concerns about this, though, comparing the designation to controversial weapons of mass destruction to what Bush said during the Iraq War. In other words, now they're saying, we need evidence. We understand what you're saying, but we want evidence. And that's where the real rub is, Sheriff.
Well, they have plenty of evidence. The statistics, I mean, the Democrats say it's half of what President Trump said, or the media, which is usually one and the same. So you think that 150,000 deaths with fentanyl doesn't make it look like a weapon of mass destruction? I think, is that an overreach by Trump, or is it a creative realism? Is it creative?
I think it's a realism, and I think that there is evidence about the people dying. The question becomes, who do you hold responsible, where, and et cetera. I mean, China is putting a lot of these chemicals and base products together. It's all happening in Mexico, but we're not talking about either of those players, right?
Doesn't seem like they have been, but a little bit China.
But isn't that the core players, though, China and Mexico?
Absolutely.
So I don't know how you have that discussion while you're focusing on Venezuela or some of these other places, Colombia and et cetera. When, hey, if it's China and Mexico, when are we going to talk about that? See, it's concerning how we're going about this is the problem. I agree with the issue being serious, and I agree that Trump wants solutions, and I pray that Congress can support him and we the people can understand it. That's really the hard part. All right, Richard Mack with me, ladies and gentlemen, CSPOA.org. I'm Sam Bushman. God save the Republic of the United States of America.